I was 3 days into what should have been a week-long hospital stay when the doctor told me my blood work had improved enough to go home early. The relief I felt walking through my front door at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday turned to ice in my chest when I heard my wife Cassandra laughing upstairs, the kind of breathless, intimate laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in over a year. My hand was still on the door handle when I heard Marcus, my business partner and supposed best friend, say something that made her giggle again, followed by the unmistakable creak of our bedroom floorboards. The grocery bags I'd stopped to pick up on the way home hit the kitchen floor with a dull thud, and I stood there in my own house feeling like a stranger who'd walked into the wrong life. 23 years of marriage, 15 years of partnership, and apparently I'd been the only one who thought either of those things mattered. My name is Stellan Kowalski, and before that Tuesday afternoon destroyed everything I thought I knew, I had what most people would call a good life. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. every morning in our suburban Chicago home, make coffee in the kitchen that still smelled faintly of the vanilla candles Cassandra burned, and drive 23 minutes to the architectural firm Marcus and I had built from nothing. Our office sat on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, with windows that caught the sunrise just right, casting long shadows across the drafting tables where we'd spent countless late nights sketching dreams into reality. I was good at what I did. Not just competent, good. I could look at a vacant lot and see a family's future home, could turn a developer's budget constraints into something beautiful that would outlast us all. My father had been a carpenter in Krakow before immigrating, and even though I'd never swung a hammer professionally, I still felt his steady hands guiding mine when I drew. That connection to building, to creating something lasting, had sustained me through lean years and sleepless nights. The hospital stay had been routine, a procedure to remove kidney stones that had been making my life miserable for months. Cassandra visited every evening, usually with Marcus tagging along since he was handling the firm while I recovered. They seemed worried about me, attentive even. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have people who cared enough to show up. Funny how perspective can flip in 30 seconds. If this story hits home, make sure you're subscribed. We tell these for a reason. Looking back, I can see the cracks that I'd spent months convincing myself were just normal wear in a long marriage. Cassandra had started working late at the gallery where she curated art exhibitions, coming home with stories about fascinating artists and late-night openings that somehow never included an invitation for me. When I'd suggest joining her, she'd get that particular smile, patient but distant, and explain that it was mostly work talk, boring stuff I wouldn't enjoy. Marcus had started showing up at our house more often too, supposedly to discuss client projects, but staying for dinner, for wine, for conversations that would stretch until I excused myself to bed, leaving them laughing softly on the back porch. He developed opinions about things that had never interested him before: wine pairings, modern art, the renovation ideas Cassandra had been floating for our kitchen. When she'd light up talking about changing the backsplash or adding a breakfast nook, Marcus would lean forward with the kind of engaged attention I hadn't seen from him in years of partnership meetings. The most painful betrayal had happened 3 weeks before my hospital stay. I'd come home early from a site inspection to find them in the kitchen, standing closer than the conversation required, her hand resting on his forearm as she showed him something on her phone. They'd stepped apart when I walked in, but not quickly, not guiltily, just enough to restore a more appropriate distance. The explanation was innocent enough. She was showing him photos from a gallery opening, getting his opinion on a piece she was considering purchasing. But the way his eyes had lingered on her face while she talked, the way she'd unconsciously smoothed her hair when he complimented her eye for art, these weren't the gestures of friendship. These were the small intimacies that couples develop, the wordless communication I'd thought belonged only to Cassandra and me. I stayed downstairs for 47 minutes, listening to the sounds above my head and trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Marcus had stopped by to check on the house while I was away. Maybe they were discussing the Henderson project that needed my input, and Cassandra was showing him where I kept my files. But the sounds weren't conversation. They were the rhythm of two people who'd found each other after thinking they were alone for the week. When I finally climbed the stairs, my legs felt heavy and disconnected, like I was moving through water. The bedroom door was closed but not locked, which somehow made it worse, they weren't even worried about being caught. I stood outside listening to Cassandra make small sounds of contentment I'd almost forgotten she was capable of, sounds that had become increasingly rare over the past year whenever I reached for her in the dark. I pushed the door open without knocking. They weren't being reckless or wild. If anything, they looked comfortable together, natural, like they'd done this many times before. Cassandra was wearing the blue silk robe I'd given her for Christmas, and Marcus was already sitting up, reaching for his shirt with the casual efficiency of someone who knew where he'd left his clothes. The afternoon light coming through our bedroom windows caught the guilt and panic on both their faces, but underneath that, I saw something that cut deeper than the betrayal itself. I saw relief. They looked relieved that the pretending was over. Marcus started to say something about stopping by to check on me, about finding Cassandra upset and worried, but his voice trailed off when he saw my expression. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later. In that moment, I felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped away everything that made me who I thought I was. 23 years of marriage reduced to a tableau in our bedroom, with my business partner pulling on his pants and my wife clutching her robe closed like modesty mattered now. I drove aimlessly for 3 hours after leaving the house, no destination in mind, just the need to move and think and figure out how to exist in this new reality. I ended up at Riverside Park, sitting on the same bench where my father used to take me as a kid to watch the boats on the Chicago River. He'd been dead for 12 years, but sitting there in the growing dusk, I could almost hear his voice telling me about the importance of building things that last, about the difference between structures that withstand storms and those that collapse at the first sign of pressure. My phone buzzed with texts from both of them, Cassandra asking where I was, Marcus wanting to talk, both of them using words like explain and misunderstanding, as if I hadn't seen exactly what I'd seen. I turned the phone off and sat there until the streetlights came on, watching joggers and dog walkers go about their normal Tuesday evening routines while my life rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. The lowest point came around 9 p.m., when I realized I had nowhere to go. Our house belonged to them now, contaminated by their betrayal. My office belonged to Marcus as much as to me. The hotel room I finally rented felt sterile and anonymous, nothing like the life I'd spent decades building. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my reflection in the dark window and wondered if this was how it felt to disappear, not all at once, but piece by piece, relationship by relationship, until nothing familiar remained. But somewhere around midnight, as I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of highway traffic and distant sirens, I remembered something my father had told me about rebuilding after the war. He said the hardest part wasn't losing what you'd built, it was deciding whether to start over or walk away. The difference between survivors and victims, he'd said, was that survivors got tired of being sad and decided to get busy instead. The first week was messy and desperate, all emotion and no planning. I hired a private investigator named Elena Reyes who'd been recommended by my divorce lawyer, thinking I needed evidence for court proceedings. But Elena came back with information that changed everything. Cassandra and Marcus had been meeting at his downtown condo for 8 months. Not just having an affair, but planning a future that included dissolving our architectural partnership and using Cassandra's connections in the art world to launch Marcus into high-end residential design for wealthy collectors. They'd been systematically positioning themselves to push me out of my own company. Marcus had been cultivating relationships with our biggest clients without including me in meetings, subtly undermining my contributions to projects, and even filing preliminary paperwork to restructure our partnership agreement. Meanwhile, Cassandra had been documenting every flaw in our marriage, every moment of distance or inattention, building a narrative that would paint their relationship as the natural result of my emotional neglect. My first instinct was to confront them with Elena's findings, to walk into Marcus's office and lay out the evidence like some television detective. But when I actually tried it, standing outside his office door with manila folders full of photographs and financial records, I realized I was shaking with a combination of rage and heartbreak that would make me look unhinged. Instead, I went home, where Cassandra was waiting with tears and explanations and promises that it was over, that she'd made a terrible mistake but still loved me. The worst part was how much I wanted to believe her. For 3 days, I almost convinced myself that we could work through this, that the affair was a symptom of problems we could solve together. But then Elena called with more information. Marcus and Cassandra had looked at houses together, had joint bank accounts I didn't know about, had been planning their exit strategy long before I'd caught them. The affair wasn't a mistake, it was a business merger disguised as romance, and I was the asset being liquidated. The revenge came together over 6 weeks of careful preparation, built around a single, undeniable truth. Marcus had been embezzling from our firm to fund his new life with Cassandra. Elena had uncovered irregularities in our client billing that went back over a year, inflated invoices, payments redirected to accounts I'd never authorized, project expenses that existed only on paper. He'd been stealing from both our clients and from me, using the money to pay for the downtown condo where he and Cassandra met, for the trips they'd taken while I thought he was at conferences, for the engagement ring Elena's photographer had captured him buying 2 weeks after my hospital release. I spent those 6 weeks pretending to reconcile with Cassandra while quietly documenting every transaction, every forged signature, every client payment that had been diverted. I let Marcus think his apologies and explanations had satisfied me, even took him out for lunch to discuss our future partnership while wearing a recording device Elena had provided. He was so confident in his manipulation that he actually bragged about some of the creative accounting he'd done, thinking he was impressing me with his business acumen. The moment itself was almost anticlimactic. I scheduled a meeting with our 3 biggest clients for a Thursday morning in November, telling them I had concerns about financial irregularities that needed their immediate attention. Marcus walked into our conference room expecting a routine project review and found our clients, Elena Reyes, a forensic accountant, and Detective Raymond Torres from the Chicago PD's white-collar crime unit waiting for him. I didn't need to say anything dramatic or satisfying. The evidence spoke for itself: bank records, forged documents, recorded conversations where Marcus had admitted to billing strategies that crossed the line into fraud. Watching his face change as he realized the scope of what I'd uncovered, seeing him understand that his carefully planned future was collapsing in real time, was more satisfying than any angry confrontation could have been. The clients immediately terminated their contracts and filed complaints with the state licensing board. The detective arrested Marcus for embezzlement and fraud. And Cassandra, who'd been so confident that our marriage was over, suddenly found herself engaged to a man facing 5 to 7 years in federal prison, with legal fees that would consume every asset they'd hidden from me. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, with Cassandra getting far less than she'd expected now that Marcus couldn't contribute to her legal fees. I kept the house, the business, and most importantly, my reputation intact. Several clients who'd left when the scandal broke actually returned once they understood that I'd been the one who exposed the fraud, not enabled it. The strangest part was how quiet my life became afterward. I'd grown so accustomed to the constant low-level stress of a failing marriage and a duplicitous partnership that the absence of that tension felt almost disorienting. I started staying late at the office again, but this time it was because I wanted to be there, because I was designing buildings that excited me instead of managing relationships that drained me. I hired a new partner, a brilliant young architect named Priya Nair, who brought fresh perspectives and infectious enthusiasm to projects I'd started thinking of as routine. We moved to a smaller office with better light, closer to the river, and filled it with the kind of collaborative energy I'd forgotten was possible when you trusted the person working beside you. 6 months after the divorce, I started working on a house for myself, not a grand statement or a monument to my survival, but a small, well-built place with large windows and a workshop where I could build furniture the way my father had taught me. It sits on 2 acres outside the city, surrounded by oak trees that were old when Chicago was young, and when I wake up there in the morning, the only sounds are birds and wind and the occasional distant train. I learned something profound about betrayal in those months. It's not the initial hurt that defines you, but how you choose to rebuild afterward. Cassandra and Marcus thought they were stealing my life, but what they actually did was force me to examine whether the life I'd been living was worth keeping. In many ways, they did me a favor I never would have done for myself. The house is nearly finished now. Last weekend, I installed the kitchen cabinets I'd built by hand, using techniques my father had shown me decades ago. There's something deeply satisfying about creating something yourself, about knowing that every joint was cut with intention, every surface sanded smooth by your own hands. It's the opposite of betrayal. It's the kind of honest work that can't be faked or stolen or undermined by someone else's selfishness. Sometimes I wonder if they ever think about the life they thought they were building together, now that reality has settled in around them. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy building something new, something that belongs completely to me, something that will still be standing long after their plans have crumbled into nothing.